Welcome to Karen Stories, where the wildest Karen encounters unfold. Get ready for hilarious, unbelievable, and shocking moments as Karens make the most outrageous demands. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to never miss a crazy story. Let's dive in. I should have known she wouldn't let it go. Karens never do. The moment she moved her SUV and the ambulance sped through, I thought naively that the worst was over, that I could race to the hospital and focus on what actually mattered, my mother. But no. Because as I turned to head back to my car, I heard it. The sharp, furious clicking of high-heeled sandals against pavement, moving fast, gaining on me. Excuse me, I clenched my jaw so hard it ached. I should have just ignored her, gotten in my car, and driven off. But I was running on adrenaline and fury, and when you're dealing with a Karen, silence is an invitation. So I turned. She was storming toward me, sunglasses perched on her head, face contorted into a mask of self-righteous outrage. That was incredibly rude, she snapped, stabbing an acrylic nail toward my chest like I had personally offended the HOA gods. You had no right to speak to me that way. I was simply enforcing the community rules. You can't just call the police on a board member because you didn't get your way. I blinked at her, actually blinked, because the sheer audacity of what I had just heard was so beyond comprehension that my brain temporarily short-circuited. My way? I repeated, my voice dangerously low. You mean letting an ambulance through so they could save my mother's life? Karen pursed her lips. That's not the point. We have procedures for a reason. You can't just expect emergency vehicles to come barreling in here without proper clearance. We have standards in this neighborhood. Standards, I echoed, my blood pressure skyrocketing. You blocked an ambulance, Karen. A vehicle with flashing lights and sirens. A vehicle meant to transport people in medical distress. You personally stood there and refused to move because you wanted to prove a point. Flex your little HOA badge? Her nostrils flared. I was following protocol. If we start making exceptions, then where does it stop? Next thing you know, we'll have delivery trucks and who knows who just waltzing in like this is some free-for-all. We have rules. Rules that you agreed to when you moved here. She was talking like I had just casually invited a parade of Amazon vans to camp out on her lawn. My hands were shaking at this point. Not just with anger, but with disbelief. The paramedics had literally threatened her with police intervention, and she still thought she was right. Karen, I said, my voice deadly calm, if you ever, and I mean ever, block another emergency vehicle from getting to someone in need, I will personally make sure you regret it. Her mouth fell open in exaggerated horror. Are you threatening me? No. I spat, stepping closer. I'm promising, you. That seemed to rattle her, if only for a second. But then she shook her head, muttering something about disrespectful residents and ungrateful rule breakers before reaching into her handbag and pulling out. Oh, you're going to love this, yeah, notepad and pen. I am filing a formal complaint, she declared, scribbling furiously like she was personally drafting the neighborhood's Declaration of Independence. You will be hearing from the board. This kind of hostility will not be tolerated. I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. It wasn't a Hector half laugh, though. It was that dry, borderline insane chuckle you let out when reality is so absurd that all you can do is marvel at the madness. Karen, I said, rubbing my temples. If you think for a second that I care about some little HOA complaint when my mother is on her way to the ER, you need to get your head examined. And guess what? You can't. Because you'd probably block the ambulance that came to take you. She gasped, clutching her pearl necklace like I had just slapped the HOA bylaws out of her hands. This is exactly the kind of attitude that degrades the integrity of this community. Oh, I was done. You know what degrades this community? I shot back, pointing at the entrance. Self-absorbed, power-hungry tyrants like you who care more about arbitrary rules than human lives. A voice cut in before she could respond. What's going on here? I turned and there stood my neighbor, Tom, a retired firefighter with a no-nonsense demeanor and a deep loathing for HOA nonsense. He was watching the scene unfold, arms crossed, his expression as unimpressed as a man who'd seen a lifetime of bad decisions and didn't have the patience for another. Karen immediately straightened up, plastering on her most concerned face. Oh, thank goodness. You're here, Tom. This resident has been incredibly aggressive toward me. He called the police on me for simply enforcing our community rules. Tom raised an eyebrow. You blocked an ambulance? Karen hesitated. Well, I mean, it wasn't that serious. It was just a minor inconvenience. Tom's eyes darkened. A minor inconvenience. Are you out of your damn mind, Karen? I spent 30 years responding to emergencies, and do you know how many people died because of people like you? You know, The ones who think their personal authority is more important than a dying person's chance at survival? Karen paled. I was just following protocol. You were being a damn fool is what you were doing, Tom snapped. And you're lucky it wasn't my family in that ambulance, because I wouldn't just be yelling. Karen sputtered, looking like she'd been slapped with a stack of overdue HOA fines. She opened and closed her mouth, but whatever excuse she was grasping for never came. Tom turned to me. Go. Get to the hospital. I'll handle this. I didn't wait. I didn't care what handling meant. I just bolted to my car and sped off, hoping that when I got back, Karen would have learned something. She wouldn't, of course, because Karens never do. When I walked into the hospital, my hands were still shaking. Not from fear, oh no. That ship had sailed hours ago, but from pure, unfiltered rage. Karen had wasted precious minutes, and for what? So she could flex her pathetic HOA authority? So she could feel powerful? I had never wanted someone to suffer the consequences of their own stupidity more than I did in that moment. But right now, my focus was singular. My mother. I rushed to the front desk, breathless. My mom, she came in by ambulance. Chest pains. Last name Thompson. The receptionist nodded, tapping furiously at her keyboard. She's in room 217. Stable condition. The doctor will be with her soon. I nearly collapsed in relief. Stable. That was all I needed to hear. I pushed through the hallways like a man possessed, barely registering the antiseptic smell or the hushed murmurs of nurses and doctors. When I reached her room, my sister was already there, eyes red-rimmed but grateful. She's okay, she whispered as I stepped in. They said we got her here just in time. Just in time. Those words nearly broke me. Because if Karen had gotten her way, if I hadn't pushed back, if those paramedics hadn't been as persistent as they were, just in time could have easily been too late. I sat beside my mother, taking her frail hand in mine. She was awake, her lips twitching into a small, exhausted smile. You look like you want to punch something. I let out a weak laugh, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. You have no idea. And then my phone buzzed. I expected it to be a text from work, maybe an update from a friend who'd heard what happened. But when I looked at the screen, my stomach dropped. HOA group chat 42 new message. Oh, this was going to be bad. I tapped in, and the first thing I saw was Karen's name plastered across half the messages. Karen, as many of you witnessed, there was a disturbance at the front entrance today involving a resident who disregarded community guidelines. Karen, this behavior was unacceptable. The HOA board will be addressing this matter immediately. I will not stand for hostility or lawlessness in our neighborhood. Karen, we are a community of order, and I refuse to let one incident jeopardize our structure. Oh, this witch. I scrolled further, my pulse pounding. Tom. You mean the disturbance where you blocked an ambulance from saving a life, Mrs. Donovan? Wait, what? Karen, please tell me that's not true. Mr. Engine, I was there. She absolutely did. The paramedics had to threaten her, to get her to move. Tom, she straight up told them they needed HOA clearance before entering with an emergency vehicle. Mrs. Donovan. Karen, please tell me you didn't do that. Karen, this is being blown out of proportion. I was simply ensuring the community rules were being followed. Tom, you blocked an ambulance. Karen. Tom, you were willing to let someone die over your power trip. Do you understand how serious that is? Mrs. Donovan. Oh my God, Mr. Engine. This is not okay. I say we call an emergency meeting. HOA can't have leadership like this. Tom, I second that. She is unfit to be on the board. Karen, this is harassment. I was only doing my duty to uphold the rules. If you all are too emotional to see that, maybe you should reconsider your place in this community. Tom. Oh, we see things pretty damn clearly now. Karen. Tom. And we're calling a meeting tonight. I couldn't hold back the satisfied exhale that escaped my lips. For the first time since this nightmare started, justice was catching up to Karen. By the time I got home from the hospital, the HOA meeting was already in full swing. My phone had been pinging nonstop, neighbors texting updates, people whispering about what was about to go down. I wasn't planning on going, but then my sister, who never cared about neighborhood drama, texted me 3 words. You should come. When I arrived, the clubhouse was packed, more people than I'd ever seen at one of these meetings. And the moment I stepped inside, all eyes snapped to me. Karen, seated at the front like a dethroned queen, stiffened. Her mouth was pressed into a hard line, her usual smugness nowhere to be found. But she still had fight in her. Oh, she sneered. The troublemaker arrives. I didn't dignify that with a response. Tom was at the podium, nodding toward me. Glad you made it. We're just about to get started. Karen scoffed, but before she could get another word in, A voice rang out from the back of the room. I called the local news. The air in the room shifted. Karen's head whipped around. You what? A woman I didn't recognize, someone from another part of the neighborhood, maybe, stood up, arms crossed. I called them. Told them everything. They're already interested. Said this kind of abuse of power is exactly what they like to report on. Karen's face went white. Tom grinned. Well, Karen, I hope you enjoy the spotlight, because it's all yours now. The room erupted. People were shouting, demanding her removal, calling for real leadership. And for the first time, Karen had nothing to say. No defense. No rules to hide behind. Because the one rule she never understood was this: when you screw over the wrong person, eventually, the whole world finds out. Karen was drowning. Not literally, though. That might have been poetic justice given how deep she had buried herself in her own mess, but figuratively. She was flailing. And the best part? She knew it. The moment the words "I called the local news" left that woman's mouth, Karen's face had gone from ghost white to an ugly shade of blotchy red. The smugness, the ever-present condescension, the air of untouchability gone. In their place? Panic, desperation. The dawning realization that, for the first time in her self-appointed reign over our community, she had lost control, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. You what? She sputtered, her voice cracking under the weight of the room's collective fury. She looked around, as if searching for an ally, but there were none. Even the people who once tolerated her power trips were now watching with the kind of morbid curiosity reserved for train wrecks. Tom crossed his arms, barely containing his satisfaction. You heard her. The news station is very interested in hearing how our dear HOA president blocked an ambulance from saving a resident's life. Should be a real heartwarming segment. Karen slammed a manicured fist onto the table. This is slander. I was just following procedure. We need to have rules, or this community will fall into chaos. Tom let out a sharp laugh. Chaos? You mean like stopping first responders from doing their damn job? That kind of chaos? Because if that's what you're aiming for, you nailed it. The murmurs in the room turned into full-on whispers and muttered agreements. Karen's eyes darted between the crowd, her panic mounting. You can't. You all are being dramatic. This is ridiculous. It's a witch hunt. I have served this community for years. I demand respect. Tom leaned forward, voice deathly calm. Respect is earned, Karen. And you just threw yours under the ambulance you tried to block. Boom. You could almost hear the weight of that line crash down on her. She was visibly shaking now, lips pressed so tightly together they were turning pale. And then, as if on cue, a new voice rang out from the back of the room. I have something to add. The room turned, parting slightly to reveal a woman I didn't recognize. Late 50s, sharp gaze, crisp business attire. She had an air of authority, like someone who had spent years dealing with people like Karen and had absolutely zero patience left. Karen flinched. Who are you? The woman pulled out a leather folder and flipped it open with the practiced ease of someone who meant business. My name is Lisa Montgomery. I'm an attorney representing the property owners in this community. The silence that followed was almost suffocating. Karen paled. Excuse me? Lisa adjusted her glasses and glanced at the crowd. I've been contacted by multiple homeowners who have had serious concerns about the conduct of the HOA leadership, particularly regarding financial discrepancies, selective enforcement of rules, and, as of today, gross negligence leading to a potential wrongful death lawsuit. Karen made a strangled noise, her whole body going rigid. This is outrageous. You can't just come in here and make accusations without proof. Lisa smiled. It wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile that let you know she had proof. Oh, but I do have proof. She pulled out a stack of documents and held them up. For starters, let's talk about the $50,000 in HOA funds that mysteriously went missing over the past 3 years. Funds that, according to financial records, were approved under your name. Dead silence. Karen's breathing hitched. That's a clerical error. I didn't take anything. Lisa ignored her and continued. Then there's the matter of your little special enforcements. Finding some homeowners over minor infractions, while conveniently overlooking violations from your friends in the HOA board. She turned to the crowd. Raise your hand if you've been unfairly fined or threatened by Karen. At least a dozen hands shot up. Karen made a sound between a cough and a gasp. You people are you're all against me. This is personal. Lisa cut her off. Oh, and let's not forget today's little incident. Blocking emergency services is not just morally reprehensible. It's illegal. And given that we now have multiple witnesses, a paper trail of complaints, and security footage. She gave a meaningful nod toward Tom, who smirked. We have more than enough to press charges for obstruction of emergency services." Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She was sinking, grasping for anything that might keep her afloat, but every excuse, but the rules she tried to conjure had already been obliterated. Lisa stacked the papers back into her folder. "So, Karen, here's what's going to happen. The HOA board will hold an immediate vote on your removal. You will resign tonight. If you refuse—" She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle in. "Then my clients will proceed with legal action, and trust me, with this much evidence, you will lose." Karen looked around, hoping, praying, for someone to step in. But the room was against her now. There was no lifeline left. Finally, with a trembling hand, she grabbed her pen, signed the resignation document, and slammed it down on the table. Lisa picked it up, nodded approvingly, then turned to the board members. "I believe you have a new vote to hold." As the room erupted into cheers, I leaned against the wall, exhaling. It was over. Karen had finally been dethroned. She gathered her things in silence, her face a mask of utter humiliation. As she passed by me on her way out, she paused for just a second, her voice barely above a whisper. "I hope you're happy." I met her gaze, my voice steady. "I will be, once my mother makes a full recovery. But you? You're going to have to live with this." And with that, she was gone. As I watched her disappear into the night, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time in this neighborhood: relief. Karen was gone. I expected to feel triumphant, to revel in the sweet victory of seeing her finally brought down. But instead, all I felt was exhausted. Not because I doubted whether she deserved what happened. Oh, she absolutely did, but because it shouldn't have taken this long. It shouldn't have taken a near tragedy, a room full of furious homeowners, a legal threat, and an impending media circus just to get rid of someone who should have never had that much power in the first place. But that's the thing about people like Karen. They thrive in spaces where people are too tired, too busy, or too indifferent to push back. They make rules for everyone but themselves, hide behind bureaucracy, and weaponize policy to mask their own insecurities and need for control. And if no one stands up to them, they just keep going. Well, not this time. The day after the meeting, the neighborhood was buzzing. The HOA board, eager to distance themselves from the fallout, immediately put out a statement, something about reevaluating leadership and reinforcing ethical governance. It was all corporate speak for "please don't sue us," but whatever. The important part was that Karen was officially out, and the board was too rattled to try anything shady for a while. As for Karen, she vanished. Oh, she still lived in the neighborhood, at least for now, but she wasn't seen. No more emails. No more impromptu inspections. No more Karen hovering around like a self-appointed monarch. It was like she had finally realized that the power she once wielded wasn't actually hers. It was borrowed. And the people she lorded it over had taken it back. But then, a week later, a letter showed up in my mailbox. No return address, just my name in stiff, familiar handwriting. I debated tossing it. I really didn't want to entertain whatever nonsense she had left to say. But curiosity won. I tore it open. "I hope you're satisfied. You didn't just take my position, you ruined my reputation. I was respected. I was someone in this community. Now, thanks to you and your ridiculous crusade, I'm a joke. People whisper when I walk past. They stare. They laugh. You didn't just humiliate me, you destroyed me. I hope you can live with that." I stared at the letter for a long time, waiting to feel guilty. I didn't. Instead, I thought about my mother, recovering in the hospital. I thought about the way Karen had stood there, arms crossed, death smug, while blocking an ambulance like she was making some kind of principled stand. I thought about the neighbors she had bullied, the fines she had dished out selectively, the fear she had used as currency. And I realized something. Karen had never been someone, not really. Not in the way that mattered. People had tolerated her, sure. They had played along, nodded politely, obeyed her nonsense because it was easier than fighting. But respect, real respect? That's earned through integrity, through kindness, through being better, when given power, not worse. Karen had never understood that, and now, it was too late. I folded the letter and tossed it in the trash. As I walked back inside, I felt lighter than I had in years. Karen may have lost everything, but for the first time, this neighborhood had finally won. It started like any other day, calm, predictable, uneventful, until it wasn't. I was sitting in my living room, sipping on my lukewarm coffee, when my phone rang. My heart clenched the moment I saw the caller ID. The assisted living facility where my mother stayed. My mother, my everything, the strongest woman I knew, had been battling a chronic heart condition for years. The nurse's voice on the other end was professional but urgent. "Sir, We've called an ambulance. Your mother is having severe chest pains. She's conscious, but she needs immediate medical attention. I didn't even hear the rest. I was already grabbing my keys, adrenaline kicking me into overdrive. My house was only 10 minutes away from the facility, and I'd already called my sister to meet me at the hospital. But what I wasn't prepared for, what no rational human being could ever prepare for, was the sheer level of entitlement I was about to face. As I approached the main entrance to the community, my eyes locked onto something that made my blood run cold. The ambulance sirens wailing, lights flashing was stopped. Completely blocked. A single car, a gleaming white SUV with an obnoxious custom license plate reading QUEENK, was parked diagonally across the entrance. And standing beside it, like some self-appointed gatekeeper of the neighborhood, was Karen. Yes, a Karen. Arms crossed. Short bob cut. Oversized sunglasses even though it was a cloudy day. The posture of someone who had never been told no a day in her life. At first, I thought maybe she was having an emergency of her own, that maybe she'd broken down, or had some reason to be blocking the only access point. But then I saw her face. Not concern. Not panic. Just pure, unfiltered arrogance. The paramedics were already out of the ambulance, frustration evident in their body language. One of them, a woman with a radio strapped to her shoulder, was trying to reason with her. "Ma'am, you need to move your vehicle. We have a medical emergency." Karen scoffed, adjusting her designer bag on her shoulder, like this was some mild inconvenience at a grocery checkout line. "I'm sorry, but this road is private property. HOA rules. You can't just drive in here without clearance." The second paramedic, a man in his 40s, looked like he was barely containing his rage. "This is an emergency response. We don't need clearance. Move your car," Karen huffed, rolling her eyes. Rolling her eyes. "I don't make the rules," she said, the smugness in her tone making me want to rip my own hair out. "If you want access, you need to get approval from the HOA board. I can call them if you'd like, but they usually take a few hours to respond to requests." This woman was actually standing here, lecturing first responders, while my mother was in the back of that ambulance, possibly having a heart attack. I stormed out of my car, barely able to see straight through my rage. "Move your damn car." She turned, lips pursed in mock sympathy. "Oh, I know this is frustrating for you, but rules exist for a reason. If we let one emergency vehicle in without clearance, then what's stopping the next one? Where do we draw the line?" I took a step forward, my hands shaking with barely restrained fury. "The line," I seethed, "is drawn at the point where me mother might die, because you're too self-important to move your overpriced piece of junk out of the way." For a second, just a second, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. Then it was gone, replaced with pure Karen indignation. "There's no need to be rude," she said, waving a manicured hand like I was a misbehaving child. "You should have planned ahead. You live here. You know how our community works." I was seeing red. Planned ahead? What? Was I supposed to have a preemptive meeting with the HOA to discuss hypothetical ambulance blockages? Before I could say anything else, the female paramedic stepped forward, voice sharp as a blade. "Ma'am, if you do not move your vehicle in the next 10 seconds, I will personally call the police and have you arrested for obstruction of emergency services." Karen let out an exaggerated gasp, clutching her chest as if she were the one having a medical crisis. "Oh, now. That is excessive. I'm just following the rules," she protested, but I could see the cracks forming in her confidence. The realization was dawning on her that she wasn't the victim in this scenario. And then, because the universe still has a sense of humor, the male paramedic, clearly at his wit's end, pulled out his radio and calmly said, "Dispatch, we have a situation. We need police assistance. We have a private citizen obstructing emergency services." Karen's eyes widened. The panic was immediate and obvious. Because, of course, calling her bluff was the one thing she hadn't prepared for. She sputtered, mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Then, without another word, she stomped to her car, yanked the door open, and peeled off with all the grace of a toddler throwing a tantrum. As the ambulance sped past, I exhaled, only then realizing how hard my fists were clenched. I turned back just in time to see Karen stomping toward me, face flushed with anger. And I knew, oh, I knew, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot.